Okay, welcome to the 25th annual Rose Scheinberg Lecture. 25 years ago, Richard and Jill Scheinberg is here, came all the way from Utah to hear the program tonight. We're so honored to have her. But Richard and Jill wanted to do something to honor Richard's aunt, Rose. Rose was a graduate of NYU Law School in 1950, and that was a very different time for progressive people, for women, there were virtually no people of color at NYU. You think there are none now. There were really none then. When I was here, there was one black kid in my class. That's a different experience. Anyway, they had a vision, and there were two aspects to their vision. One was the focus. They wanted a program that focused on the cutting edge issues of gender, race, and class. And second, it was a vision about structure. They didn't want to just create an endowment that was controlled by the university or controlled by the faculty. They wanted to create a structure that was controlled by the students, because they appreciated the students were more cutting edge than aging faculty or the administration, whatever. It's rather run by a self-perpetuating group of students. And I want to acknowledge the students who are now on the self-perpetuating committee. The graduating classes, Miriam Marks, Miriam here, there in the back, Nora Cyril, yep, Nora here, maybe off getting ready for dinner, and Kayla Vincent. Kayla's been on the committee for several years now because she's in a joint degree program that keeps her here for more than 3 years. Our new students are two L's, Will Hughes and Sam, right here. And soon we'll be sending out an invitation inviting 1Ls to apply to be part of the ongoing committee and to pick next year's lecturer. The faculty on the committee are Alina Das, who's not here because she's on leave and probably off representing immigrants someplace, Melina Healy, me, and Naomi Sunshine, who's been on the committee for several years now, and as a lawyering faculty, and is now and in the future will be the chair, because I've retired and become emeritus. In addition to having students run the committee and pick the lecturer, we look to sponsoring groups of students to help us think about things and to encourage people to come. They're mostly listed in the program. In addition to the groups listed in the program, late arrivals are ASC, SALSA, TILSA. I think this is the biggest group of sponsoring organizations that we've ever had for a Scheinberg lecture. It's either the product of the time or the power of our speakers. I think it's probably both. The past lecturers, which are in the back of the program, are a very, very impressive group. All but one of them are women. All but 5 of the 24 are people of color. All but 4 are not lawyers. So you see that Scheinberg's vision and the structure of the process has produced what I think has been an extraordinary program. Past lectures from recent years are available on the Scheinberg website, and I'll confess I sometimes go back to look at them because they're so good, and if you haven't seen them, you should. The introducers, which we used to list in the program, are equally impressive, and we've stopped listing them because we can't fit them all in and have a small program, but you can find them on the website. Our introducer this year is Joey Mogul, who I just met a few minutes ago. Joey's a 1997 graduate of the CUNY Law School, an activist, an organizer, an author, and a teacher. And there's some stuff about Joey in the program, and you will learn more in just a minute. But I want to emphasize the fact that he's a CUNY graduate, that she's a CUNY graduate. I was involved in the advisory committee that set up the CUNY Law School before it existed, and taught there and worked there and worked with the CUNY graduates for many, many years. And this is heresy here in the halls of NYU, where I've been since 1965. But CUNY is the best place, the best law school in the country. Shout it out to the CUNY students. I think there are some CUNY students here. Yay, CUNY students. It's the best place to learn to be a movement lawyer of any law school in the United States. And NYU has a lot of virtues, but CUNY, if that's your question, CUNY's your answer. I want to welcome Joey as a CUNY law School graduate and somebody with interesting things to say.
Thank you very much. I can't agree with you more. CUNY in the house. All right. Good evening. It is such an honor and privilege to be here today to introduce to you Mariame Kaba. And while I am thrilled to be able to introduce you, because you are one of the most smartest, savviest, most principled organizers I've had the joy of working with.
Excellent choice to limit it.
It is a daunting task to do this. And I have spent days getting ready because Mariame has done so much amazing work over decades of time in so many different areas on a vast number of issues. It's hard to catalog one's mind around all that she's built and accomplished. And it's also just, for me personally, I want to get it right because I madly respect, love, and adore Mariame Kaba. As for titles, Mariame has many. She's an educator who is deeply committed to education for all, popular, academic, and scholarly. And like Rose Scheinberg, she will not let any institution tell her what she can teach or preach, despite serious personal costs to her. She's a writer, a researcher, an archivist, a curator, and just within the last 18 months, she's authored a book entitled Missing Daddy, a children's book about a child whose parent is incarcerated. And she co-created a guided tour mapping the lives and work of Black women activists and artists on Chicago's South Side, called Lifting as They Climb. She's also a ginormous fundraiser, who in this past year alone raised over $300,000 with Michelle Duster and Nicole Hannah-Jones to build a monument to Ida B. Wells on the South Side of Chicago. Mariame is a guru when it comes to social media. She regularly tweets, Facebooks, and blogs, sharing her wisdom, her insights, and her wicked sense of humor. If you haven't checked it out, she's Prison Culture. Check her out. The fact is, so many people have been influenced by her, moved by her, that there's an entire hashtag called #MariameTaughtMe. And there's several Mariamisms that you should check out. But beyond all that, Mariame is an organizer. And not just any organizer, but an organizer extraordinaire. She has spent the last 3 decades fighting violence: police, state, interpersonal, and civilian violence. In fact, one of the first demonstrations she organized was right here in Battery Park in the 1980s. She was a teenager at the time when she and other youth were organizing against police violence. And they wanted Chuck D, right? Chuck D to come speak.
Don't say this story. Really?
One thing, you didn't think I was listening in that car ride, but I was. One thing led to another, and someone listed Chuck D as a speaker on a flyer when no such arrangements were made. So as you can imagine, for at least those of you who know Chuck D, people turned up. So Miriam and her fellow organizers were overwhelmed, freaking out. They had no idea what to do, and they had no permit for this rally whatsoever in Battery Park. But Miriam, being Miriam, stayed sane, made some calls, her sister made some more, and lo and behold, Chuck D showed up for that demonstration. Dare to dream, people. Dare to dream. But as an organizer for social justice, Miriam is deeply invested in building collective power and creating containers for people to come and struggle together, recognizing that we all have different strengths and talents and we can't all do anything. But if we create space and place to come together, we can and do tremendous transformative things. And as part of Miriam's commitment to social justice, she's deeply invested in supporting and encouraging youth organizing. She's devoted serious time, energy, and resources to nurture and mentor youth by ensuring there are spaces for them to grow and be in leadership. And this was certainly the case with the creation of We Charge Genocide, a group that was formed in the spring of 2014. After the tragic death of Dominique Franklin, known as Damo, a young black man from Chicago. Damo passed away when he was unnecessarily tased by Chicago police officers. They tased him when they were chasing him. And they were chasing him because he stole a bottle of vodka from a Walgreens. That's how he died. Damo's friends were devastated. Their grief was palpable. And Miriam, who was friends and worked with so many of them, racked her brain to try to figure out how to help them in their desperate time of need. And that's when she devised the plan to send an all-youth of color delegation to the UN to raise racist police violence against youth of color in Chicago. And Miriam intentionally and deliberately named the group We Charge Genocide, after the historic 1951 petition to the UN, authored by William Patterson, documenting racist state violence in the US. Miriam was well aware that the name would be controversial, but she was not interested in sugarcoating the racist violence in the US for others. Paige May, who later started Assata's Daughters, currently in Chicago, was one of the first members of We Charge Genocide, and she drafted a shadow petition to the UN Committee Against Torture, documenting police violence against youth of color. And then some of Damo's friends and several others, young, middle-aged, old, came together to form We Charge Genocide and raise enough funds to send 8 youth of color to the UN committee hearings on the US's compliance with the Convention Against Torture in October of 2014. It was the first time an all youth of color delegation went to present issues to the UN committee. The We Charge Genocide delegation traveled to Geneva, and they were amazing, courageous, fearless, speaking truth to power. And at the final hearing of these hearings in Geneva, Switzerland, in response to the US government's misrepresentations about police violence in the US, the youth stood up, they locked arms, and they held a silent protest in the UN chambers. It was an uprising that captured the attention of international media, and it brought new meaning to the whole world's watching. Weeks later, the UN Committee Against Torture issued its findings, citing Damo by name, which is historic and remarkable. And the committee noted its concerns about police violence against African American and Latino youth in Chicago. That never would have happened without We Charge Genocide and Miriam. Words cannot describe the energy, excitement, validation this entire experience had, and it propelled We Charge Genocide, with Miriam's guidance, to join the campaign seeking reparations for the Burge torture survivors in Chicago, making it the most successful, intergenerational, multiracial campaign I've had the great privilege to be part of. But throughout it all, Miriam is a luminary, and a true visionary who writes, organizes, and exposes the systemic anti-black racism of the prison industrial complex. And she's a loud and proud abolitionist. She continually pushes us to think of alternatives to policing and incarceration in order that we can live in a world where we are all safe and free from violence. I personally have been influenced by your thinking and writing about abolition and transformative justice. And as you know, it served as a source of inspiration for the reparations ordinance in Chicago. So just a little bit of background. Can I just ask, who's heard of Burge and the Chicago police torture cases? Okay, I'm gonna be quick. Over the course of 20 years, former Chicago Police Commander John Burge and white detectives under his command were responsible for torturing over 120 black men and women on Chicago's South Side. It was racially motivated physical violence that was used to extract confessions that then secured scores of wrongful convictions and the death sentence for 11. After decades of litigation, organizing, and investigative journalism exposed this racially motivated pattern and practice of torture, and years were spent and continue to be spent in trying to get the police torture survivors out from behind bars. We also, including myself, spent so much time trying to seek the criminal prosecution of the officers. And while doing so, we were only thinking of the few tools in the narrow, limited box that our law provides us in this country. And when we were so focused on prosecution of the officers, we were not thinking of ways that we could come together to meet the material needs of the torture survivors themselves, most of whom had never received any financial compensation for the torture they endured, let alone any psychological counseling or healing services, despite the emotional scars they still endured and coped with. It was then after Burge, ultimately years later, Burge was convicted in federal court, not for the torture he committed, but for perjury and obstruction of justice for the lies he told when denying he and others engaged in torture. Now, many people think that is the ultimate victory that we could have. Burge was ultimately the torture ringleader convicted. But what I can tell you is that it was a hollow victory because it did nothing to meet the material needs of the torture survivors. And that's when a group of us came together and we formed a group known as the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials. And we started off by thinking about how we would create public memorials to capture the racist torture and violence in the Burge torture cases. And it was part of that process that I then drafted a reparations ordinance on behalf of the Burge torture survivors, answering a call put out by Stan Willis, a member of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. The reparations ordinance and campaign was a new abolitionist demand for accountability and redress. It was one where we were seeking to meet their needs without pouring any time or energy into the fatally flawed criminal legal system. In the poetic words of Miriam, it was a physical embodiment of making Black lives matter. Later in the fall of 2014, sorry I'm going long, I'll keep it quick. As the local election season was underway, we were building necessary aldermanic support for the ordinance. We got half the city council involved, but we did not have a well-developed campaign, and we lacked a strategic plan to figure out how we were going to leverage the election that was currently going on for mayor and aldermanic candidates to get the reparations legislation passed. So Miriam, despite all her other work and obligations, jumped into the fray. She devoted countless numbers of energy, hours, wisdom, and talent to developing our ground game. She reached out and mobilized scores of supporters to join the campaign. She initiated citywide teach-ins, created curricula called Teach Burge, helped educate people about the cases and get them to reach out to Mayor Emanuel and demand he support the reparations ordinance. She was the inspiration behind sing-ins, rallies, demonstrations at City Hall. She created something she called Reparation Sunday, recruiting some of the biggest churches into Chicago to preach and organize about the reparations ordinance. The reality is, Miriam breathed new life into the campaign for reparations for the Burge torture survivors. And there's no question that we never would have passed that legislation without Miriam. And so what did that legislation include? It included the creation of a $5.5 million fund to provide financial compensation to the torture survivors. The creation of a community counseling center, now named the Chicago Torture Justice Center on the south side of Chicago, which provides services to the torture survivors, their family members, and all police violence victims. The legislation provides that all the Burge torture survivors, their families, as well as their grandchildren, are allowed free enrollment in Chicago city colleges. The legislation prescribes, and now all 8th and 10th graders are receiving education and a curriculum about the Burge torture cases every single year to all 8th and 10th graders. The legislation created an official apology from the city of Chicago for the torture and the creation of a public memorial, although we still have a fight on our hands to make that happen. With the passage of the reparations legislation, Chicago became the first city in the United States to provide reparations for racially motivated police violence. We made the city of Chicago provide money to survivors and services it was not legally obligated to do. It was historic. So now you're going to hear from Miriam about all of the work she's doing on behalf of women and girls and how she is merging organizing against domestic violence and sexual violence with prison abolition, rejecting the idea that prosecution makes women safe. And you're going to hear about the campaign she's initiated, Free Them New York. It's now time for all of us to get involved. So there's so much more I can say, and there's so much more I could describe. I could be up here for the rest of the time, but I'm going to give it over to Mary, okay? I'm going to give it over to the Ida B. Wells of our time, to the Ella Baker of our time, and to the Beyonce of social justice. So please, put your hands together and give it up to Mary.
Okay. Can somebody who knows how to manage this show me how to get this in for the PowerPoint, which came so late? Thank you. I'm going to start without it. That'd be great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hello. Thank you for taking time to come out today on a Thursday evening to be part of. Thank you. To be part of this. Thank you. Yes, there we go. I don't do PowerPoints, and I really hate them. But I thought I should try to make them for today. And I'm gonna let it do its thing. Thank you. In order to move the thing forward, do I just click on, I just use one of these like little arrows,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Okay, great. Okay. So, thank you all again for inviting me to be here. I want to thank the Scheinberg family. I want to thank Professor Sylvia Law and also all of the other members of the coordinating team for this event and for inviting me to be part of it. I want to tell you first and foremost, I don't do photos, so if you're taking any photos of me, don't. I'm happy to have you take audio if that's what you really want to do, but you also don't have to do that, but feel free. It's really, again, an honor to be invited to give this lecture, which commemorates the legacy of Rose Scheinberg. And I didn't know anything about Rose until I was invited to give this lecture. And since I'm a researcher by training, I ended up spending a whole lot of time falling down the rabbit hole of the internet, researching her life and work. And I really could not be more honored to be an inheritor of her legacy. So thanks to the family members who are here today representing her and her life and the work that she did. I want to thank my friend and my comrade and my political inspiration, Joey Mogul, for taking time to be here and to introduce me this evening. I'm even going to forgive the Beyonce reference, which I absolutely hate, but I'm going to forgive it for tonight. Joey came from Cornell to do this. I really appreciate it. I also think Joey should be up here giving this lecture, so that's a gentle nudge to the coordinating committee in case you're trying to think of who to invite next. So I'm going to talk, a little bit about, the title is Free Them All. Defending the Lives of Black Criminalized Survivors of Violence is the work. So I'm going to talk to you about the work I'm doing around criminalized survival, and that's work I've been doing for many, many years, and I'll focus on that as opposed to some of the other stuff that I do on a regular basis. So in 1978, Assata Shakur, who had been incarcerated on Rikers Island, wrote about her experience of being incarcerated there in an essay that it's titled Women in Prison, How It Is With Us. I don't know how many of you have ever read that essay, but if you haven't, you should take a look at it. It's really relevant and a good essay still today. So here's a quote from that essay. "There are no criminals here at Rikers Island Correctional Institution for Women, only victims. Most of the women, over 95%, are Black and Puerto Rican. Many were abused children. Most have been abused by men, and all have been abused by the system. There are no big-time gangsters here, no premeditated mass murderers, no godmothers. There are no big-time dope dealers, no kidnappers, no Watergate women. There are virtually no women here charged with white-collar crimes like embezzling or fraud. Most of the women have drug-related cases. Many are charged as accessories to crimes committed by men. And the major crimes that women here are charged with are prostitution, pickpocketing, shoplifting, robbery, and drugs. Women who have prostitution cases or who are doing, quote, fine time make up a substantial part of the short-term population. The women see stealing or hustling as necessary for the survival of themselves or their children, because jobs are scarce and welfare is impossible to live on. One thing is clear: American capitalism is in no way threatened by the women in prison on Rikers Island." So that's just excerpt from that essay is, I don't think you would be stunned if you went into Rikers today and you saw the types of people who end up behind bars there. You would see kind of the relevance of the words that she offers, right? You would see so many women in there because of the drug trade. You would see so many women in there because they are, kind of being brought up on charges usually related to some person they've been with. You'll see a lot of people who are suffering from various forms of illnesses, including mental health issues. You will see a population of people that is not so different from the population that Assata talks about in 1978. In the short excerpt, she explains kind of how prison and welfare and deindustrialization combine to manage and control women of color, and particularly Black women. She illustrates how racialized and gendered survival methods have been criminalized. Since the late 1970s, criminalization has been the way to deal with social problems in the US produced by racial capitalism. Criminalization is simply like the wind now for Black people, only noticed when there's a hurricane or tornado, otherwise barely remarked upon, mundane and routine. Part of the climate, so to speak. What I know to be true is that criminalization orders Black life in the United States. It is the constant specter hovering over our existence, and this criminalization is the reality for many people of color, and in particular for Black people who are survivors of violence, and the fact that those violences are things they confront daily and are treated as though they are inherent pathologies should be of no surprise to most of the people in this room. So, some of you may have come to an event that we held here at NYU I think last year at some point, that was focused on a young woman named Brescia Meadows. Brescia Meadows was 14 years old in July 2016 when she used the gun that her father had brandished for years against her and her family, terrorizing and abusing them to allegedly shoot him in his sleep. Brescia had long learned to fear her father, who had repeatedly made threats to kill her and her family. The evidence of her father's abuse could be seen in police reports, orders of protection, faded bruises, stories from neighbors, and rumors of sexual violence. On more than one occasion, though, Brescia escaped. Each time, she was returned to her house of horrors. And the last time she ran to her aunt's home, Her aunt is a police officer, but she could not protect her niece. The state didn't actually protect Brescia. Instead, the state was her abuser. She was jailed for over a year as she waited for trial, which was scheduled on May 22nd, 2017, as prosecutors waited to decide whether they would charge a 14-year-old girl as an adult in order to be able to ask for 25 years to life for first-degree murder. During that time that she was incarcerated, she was repeatedly placed on suicide watch. We know what detention does to people who are grown people, but detention for children is actually a form of torture. In January 2017, as Brescia was being transferred to a mental health facility, a private one for evaluation, Marissa Alexander was throwing off the shackles of her ankle monitor after 2 years of house arrest, an additional 3 years of incarceration. Marissa's torturous journey through the criminal punishment system began in 2010 when she was confronted by her estranged husband in her home after having just given birth to her third child, a little girl, 9 days earlier. Menaced by a man who admitted in a deposition to having abused every woman he'd been partnered with except for one, Marissa used a gun that she was licensed to own and fired a warning shot into the air to ward off her abusive husband. For this, a jury of her so-called peers found her guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in a 12-minute jury deliberation. It was that deadly weapons charge that prosecutors used to recommend that Marissa be sentenced under Florida's 1020 law to a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. A judge who had previously ruled that Marissa was ineligible to invoke stand your ground as a defense because she didn't appear afraid, said that his hands were tied by the law and ratified the 20-year sentence. Both Brescia and Marissa, a Black girl and a woman, are part of the U.S.'s legacy of criminalizing survivors of violence for self-defense. And this is particularly true for women and gender nonconforming people of color, especially Black people in the U.S., who are seen as inherently threats, who are never vulnerable, who cannot be afraid, who are always aggressors, and whose skin is weaponized, making it impossible to be considered victims of violence. As we've been saying for years, as I've been saying for years, women and gender nonconforming people seem to have no selves to defend. In the only interview that Marissa gave after her sentencing, she said, "This is my life I'm fighting for. This is my life, and it's my life, and it's not entertainment. This is my life. If you do everything to get on the right side of the law, and it's a law that does not apply to you, where do you go from there?" Black women and girls in the United States have long sought protections from the state for interpersonal violence, while simultaneously organizing against the violence of state power. Black women and girls' unique vulnerabilities have led to demands for state protection, even as we've been actually the subjects of state violence. Ida B. Wells Barnett, who was referenced earlier by Joey, and is a real touchstone of mine, is one of the earliest Black women activists, intellectuals, to take up Black women's physical and sexual vulnerability as a public concern. She was motivated and galvanized into activism by her lifelong concern with protecting Black women and girls. The case that she made against lynching, which people know her for, was not simply that white people were lying when they said that they were primarily targeting Black men as rapists, but that it was also that the sexual violence against Black women and girls was ignored and covered up by those very same white people. For Wells and the Black club women of the 19th and early 20th centuries, state protection was considered a right of citizenship, which they did not have, but sought and wanted. Black women, though, are more often than not targets of state violence. And when and if we are ever protected by the punishing state, the costs are very high indeed. In some cases, what we call the gendered paternalism of the state, which is a term coined by lesbian and radical feminists of the 1970s, uses Black women as pawns to cement and reinforce racialized criminalization. So in the cases, for example, where you have Black women who are going in for orders of protection in a domestic violence case who then refuse to testify against their abusers in court, you have prosecutors turning on those Black women, sometimes incarcerating them until they agree to go ahead and prosecute the person they want to go after for a domestic violence case. A perfect way of thinking about gendered paternalism within the law. Over the years, however, the contradictions of demanding protection from the state that also targets and kills us have proved irreconcilable. It's easy to understand why the oppressed and marginalized want the criminal punishment system to apply the laws equally. That's totally understandable that people within the system are fighting for that and would like that. Everyone wants accountability when they experience harm. But we have to contend with the fact that the system that we currently have is never going to indict itself. And that when we call for and demand more prosecutions and punishment, this only actually serves to reinforce a system that really must itself be indicted. Baldwin teaches us, the law is meant to be my servant and not my master, still less my torturer and my murderer. To respect the law in the context in which the American Negro finds himself is simply to surrender his self-respect. There have been endless hours and days and months and years of activist energy expended in reaction to and reinforcement of this corrupt system. We have to ask, as Dr. Nancy Heitzak has, why is the vision of justice so narrow and carceral, demanding arrest, trial, and punishment without cease? She adds, stop asking for justice from the system that is killing us. Demand abolition, and then demand more. For many years now, my work has focused on ending criminalization and the prison industrial complex. However, I came to that work through my activism and organizing around gender-based violence, as Joey mentioned before. It was in college that I began what has now been a decades-long journey to find ways of addressing violence outside of the state, especially racialized gender violence. And I should make clear, though, at the very beginning, how I define violence against women and girls, trans and non-trans. I use a definition developed by the Argentinian coalition Ni Una Menos, and violence against women, as they define it, has many facets. It is domestic violence, but it is also the violence of the market, the violence of debt, the violence of capitalist property relations, the violence of the state, the violence of discriminatory policies against lesbian, trans, and queer women, the violence of state criminalization of migratory movements, the violence of mass incarceration, and the institutional violence against women's bodies through abortion bans and lack of access to free health care and free abortion. Yes, free abortion on demand all the time. Okay, we'll put that out there. People do not say that anymore when actually people were saying that in the 70s all the fucking time. We've got to be careful. No, the more careful you are, you've limited yourself already. The right isn't going to give you what you want. They're going to give you what they want. So your job is to want a hell of a lot, right? And fight like hell for it. So keeping it moving. So I adopt a comprehensive and multifaceted definition of violence against women and girls, which demands equally comprehensive and multifaceted responses. For years, I've been working with others through my participation in Insight Women and Trans People of Color Against Violence, and most recently with Survived and Punished, to act in solidarity with criminalized survivors of violence. Through my current work with Survived and Punished, I look to the histories of mass collective defense for inspiration about how to enact this solidarity. So I want to show you, if possible, a short clip of a video, but I think it's pretty not loud. I don't know what's been going on with it, so we'll try. About the story of Joanne Little. How many people know who Joanne Little is? Some of you here. Yeah. All of you should. You know, her case is a very important law case, and we'll just talk in a minute about it.
Joanne Little was a black girl who grew up in a small town called Washington in North Carolina. In 1974, she was 20 when she was arrested for shoplifting and rape. Serving time in the Beaufort County Jail, she was sexually assaulted by a guard, Clarence In self-defense, she took the ice pick he was threatening her with and stabbed him. She escaped and he was found dead in her cell. Joanne was charged with first-degree murder, which carries the possibility of the death penalty. Joanne's case became a national cause for prisoners' rights advocates, feminists, people advocating against the death penalty, and for racial justice. The Joanne Little Defense Committee raised over $350,000 for her bond and legal fees. The protests about her case were widespread and global. After a 5-week trial, the jury, made up of both black and white people, deliberated for less than 90 minutes before acquitting Little. It was the first time a woman was acquitted of murder on the grounds of self-defense against sexual violence.
Joanne Little's trial is important, and the real import is that they demonstrated that people can collectively generate the kind of power that can be earth-shifting, that can change lives and change society.
Today, there are many people like Joanne Little, prosecuted because they defend themselves from sexual violence, domestic violence, racist and transphobic attacks, still in prison all over the U.S. Please go to the Survive and Punish website to learn about these
So,
and get involved.
I want to say first and foremost that I'm very excited to be able to actually show this video, even though it's so low. But Hope Decter, who's here, who's part of BCRW, Barnard Center for Research on Women, made this video, edited the video, along with Dean Spade, who some of you also may know, who's a lawyer and law professor, and does a lot of work on issues around transformative justice and abolition. And the person who was narrating it is Cece McDonald, who some of you may know of, because Cece was criminalized for defending herself from a transphobic violent attack that happened in Minneapolis. She ended up having to go to prison for 19 months in a men's prison, and talked a lot about kind of what that experience was like when CC's Free CC campaign came up and came into kind of being around her case. People were initially wanting to fight to move her from a men's prison into a women's prison, and CC told people prisons are unsafe for everyone. I'm staying here, right? That wasn't going to be playing into that at all, and decided that that she would just do her time where she was. So we're really lucky to have CC be a part of making that particular video and supporting that work. So okay, I don't know what's going on. Whoever was helping me put this slide back on, please help me. Thank you. I'm really technical. I don't know what's going on. Thank you. So while State versus Joanne Little, thank you, is noted for being the first time a woman was acquitted of murder on the grounds of self-defense against sexual violence, its wider impact and legacy was its powerful reflection on the interconnections of racism, sexism, and economic inequality. Joanne was in prison, in jail, awaiting her next trial because she had stolen some stuff that she needed for survival. Then while in jail, she then gets assaulted by the prison guard. She defends herself by using an ice pick to kill him. She's on the run for several days, and she turns herself in. And it's really important, as a scholar, activist, and former political prisoner Angela Davis wrote in Ms. Magazine in June of 1975. She says, "Those of us, men and women, who are Black or people of color, must understand the connection between racism and sexism that is so strikingly manifested in her case. Those of us who are white and women must grasp the issue of male supremacy in relationship to the racism and class bias which complicate and exacerbate it." The Joanne Little case is the only example that we have in the U.S. history of a mass mobilization against state violence against a Black woman. The only one. So I think, that's both a shameful and sad reflection of how little our lives are valued, but also really interesting to think about what galvanized that many different kinds of people to come together to fight for this woman's life. So there's a lot that's interesting about the organizing around Joanne Little. Mainly feminist organizers turned the politics of violence and safety on their heads. They made state violence, rather than state protection from violence, the target of their organizing efforts. They underscored the race, class, and sexual dimensions of violence and safety. They put women of color at the center of the anti-violence movement for a brief moment in history. They showed the ways in which the state compounded rather than alleviated violence in the lives of marginalized people. So this brings me to the work of supporting and fighting for the lives of criminalized survivors today in America, in this current moment that we're in. African American women are 2 times more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts. That has been shrinking. It used to be 3 times about 6 or 7 years ago. Now it's about 2 times more likely. Does anybody want to guess as to why that rate is shrinking? Now 2 times more versus 3 times more? Why are more white women being incarcerated now? What?
There are more of them to incarcerate, or
There've always been more of them than, but why now? What do you think? What's going on right now? Yeah, the opioid crisis is actually making it so that a lot more poor, rural white women are coming into the system than ever before. Yeah. So young black girls are suspended from school at 6 times the rate of their white female peers. We know that causes often school pushout, which leads again indirectly to criminalization. You also want to add to that the increased risk of poverty, violence, and sexual assault. And it's clear that black women and girls are too often made targets of both interpersonal and state violence. There's a dearth of data about gender nonconforming people and trans people in men's prisons. People who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, we know are incarcerated at twice the rate of American adults who do not identify as LGBTQ. 16% of transgender and gender nonconforming respondents to a national survey had spent time in jail or prison, in comparison to about 5% of all American adults, with higher rates for transgender women, 21%, than transgender men, 10%. According to the ACLU, nearly 60% of people in women's prisons nationwide and as many as 94% of some women's prisons populations have a history of physical or sexual abuse before being incarcerated. These numbers are high because survivors are systemically punished for taking action to protect themselves and their children while living in unstable and dangerous conditions of violence. Survivors are criminalized for self-defense, for failing to control abusers' violence, for migration, removing children from abusive people, being coerced into criminalized activity, securing resources needed to live day to day while suffering from economic abuse. Our work at Survived and Punished is in the lineage of the lesbian and radical feminists whose politics found their expression in collective defense, a term coined by historian Emily Hobson, and who adopted an organizing strategy of opposition to U.S. state violence. These were feminists who used the politics of collective and mass defense to challenge the intersections of gender-based violence and racialized criminalization. These are feminists who would say, in the words of former political prisoner Susan Sachs, "My feminism does not drive me into the arms of the state, but even further from it." Survived and Punished demands the immediate release of survivors of domestic and sexual violence and other forms of gender violence who are imprisoned for survival actions, including self-defense, failure to protect, migration, removing children from abusive people, being coerced into acting as an accomplice, securing resources needed to live. Furthermore, we demand that these same survivors are swiftly reunited with their families. This is really important because typically over the years, especially on the left, when we think about defense campaigns, we usually mount defense campaigns for people we see as dissenters and political prisoners. And often, the people who are survivors of gender violence are not seen in that same light of political prisonership. That's actually new, because in the 1970s, a lot of survivors of gender-based violence were seen also as political prisoners. And people created and mobilized defense campaigns in support of their lives. That is partly what we are doing through Survived and Punished and other formations that exist around the country. How does it look in practice to demonstrate our solidarity for criminalized survivors of violence? For many of us, we've created defense campaigns for criminalized survivors like Marissa and Brescia to fight for their freedom. In those cases, we happen to be pretty successful. As part of the defense campaign work that I've been involved in and that others have been involved in, we've been willing to put ourselves on the line publicly. We take direct action. So before my concluding remarks, I'd like to show a very short video of an action co-organized by Lifted Voices and my organization Project NIA to dramatize the plight of Naomi Freeman, a criminalized survivor of domestic violence who killed her abuser in self-defense and was jailed for months while pregnant awaiting trial in Cook County.
In solidarity with our fallen, all those consumed by the generalized violence incited by the state. Under these conditions, we are forced to fight for the civil right to life. At this intersection of ICE, the NCC prison, and the Chicago Stock Exchange, we bring flowers in memory of all those taken from us. We connect the dots and let these flowers indistinguishable symbols of our love for justice. As we lock arms in love, we embody the strength that goes before us and shine within us. That we keep their words firm. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. Tonight, we also join hands to ensure that Naomi Freeman be released from Cook County because no work for freedom can ever be criminalized. This year of organizing and action has shown the city that its people are and will continue to liberate ourselves because it is our duty to fight for our freedom.
So what you just saw there was people who were putting their bodies on the line to raise awareness about interpersonal violence and its intersection with state violence. We were also commemorating those who we'd lost over the course of that year. This was in December of 2015. And we were trying to invite people to learn more about Naomi's plight in her case and to donate money to the bond fund of the people who put their lives on the line, their bodies on the line, in order to be able to raise bond for Naomi to be freed from prison, from jail, sorry. She had a $350,000 bond. And so we were trying to raise money to get her out. She had been, by that point, she'd already been in jail for 6 months. She was 7 months pregnant. She had lupus. She was having a lot of issues while at the jail. And we were able to raise the bond to be able to bond her out. She was bonded out on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, to spend time with her family and also to be able to fight for her, fight her case free, right? You all know that you're much more likely to be convicted if you're being held in jail than you are if you actually can fight your case from being out while you're actually out on bail. So we really wanted that for her. By September of 2017, Naomi's first-degree murder charge was reduced to involuntary manslaughter with 30 months for probation and a requirement that she visit a mental health professional monthly. And really this only happened because of community organizing and because of collective defense. They would have railroaded her. She would have been in for life. I have no question about that whatsoever. She had a public defender, not a private attorney. She was a poor Black woman, 3 kids. Like, it just was not gonna be for her. She would end up being one of the cases we'd be fighting for after incarceration. I'm an abolitionist. I hate the idea of people being mandated to mental health confinement or mental health treatment. I see that as other form of carcerality. But in this case, Naomi and her family were happy to take it as opposed to being in a cage for 25 years to life, which is what she was facing at the time. So the deal that got worked out with prosecutors because of community pressure ended up being much to her benefit as opposed to what she was experiencing before. So if somebody can come back again and help me, please. Thank you. This is the last time you'll have to do it because I'm not doing any more videos. I appreciate that. So I would like to think of the work that my comrades and I are engaged in as a form of what Christina Sharp has called wake work. We are employing a particular form of care, and in our own way, as Christina puts it, quote, keeping and putting breath back into the Black body. This is the work that allows us to move into a future that would be a better future than the current one, the current present that we are living in. And as I heard Sadia Hartley say at an event celebrating Christina's book called In the Wake last year, care is the antidote to violence. I would add that care and attention to the wake is how we make a way out of no way. I mentioned before, I think Joey mentioned before, that, I'm here back in New York now, after having been in Chicago for 20 years, having organized in Chicago with people like Joey and many other amazing organizers and lawyers and other folks to try to transform the city from the kind of neoliberal hell zone that it currently is to something better. And I have to say that over the years, we've been pretty successful at doing what we were hoping to do. We got rid of a horrific prosecutor through a Buy Anita campaign. Rom is not going to run again, which, my God help us, we are so happy. We got reparations for police torture survivors. You would think, right, that we're like, what's going on in Chicago? Well, I have to say that what's going on in Chicago is that people work together much better than they do here in New York. I'm from New York. I was born and raised here. People in New York think they've got everything figured out really, really well. People hate working together. Most people are actually busy tearing each other down as opposed to building up things together. That's the organizing culture of this city. And it's something I experienced when I was a teenager organizing here and when I was in my 20s organizing here. So it's not a shock to me. I'm back now here, and what we're doing in New York through Survived and Punished New York is to actually try to create a kind of a forward thrust to try to force the governor of this goddamn state, which I don't know why they're electing this man again, but whatever. That was a little commentary moment, but I have to say it. What the hell is wrong with people? But anyway, so this guy is going to be the governor for however long he's going to be the governor, and we are continuing to make a push and demand that he free criminalized survivors that are currently in New York prisons. The governor has unlimited powers of clemency. Clemency, as you know, has two parts: pardons and commutations. He's made about 160 to 170 pardons. Most of those pardons are for people who committed crimes when they're 16 and 17 years old. I mean, give me a break, pardon all of those people instead of just 160. Okay. He's been in office now, 8 years? He's commuted 12 sentences in that entire time. He's released one criminalized survivor of violence, a domestic violence survivor named Valerie Sealy. So Survived and Punished New York is making a push to insist that he free people, that he free criminalized survivors, that he free everybody. He's got 51,000 people in his prisons right now in New York State. He could free all of them if he wanted to. That's the power that the executive has to use clemency without any sort of, limits, right? So what the governor's office is telling us every time we bring this up is that there are rules. There are rules. We got to figure out the rules. You all know this, lawyers, people who are lawyers. You're really concerned with the rules and the laws and all this. The laws were friggin' made by them. They made the goddamn rules. They created the office in 2015. They said they were going to free all these people. They made stupid criteria that make no sense. And then they turn around and say, we can't do anything because we've got our criteria. Our thing is, you can free anybody you want at any time for any reason. We don't actually abide by your rules. That's lovely that you have them, but you can you can do this. So we are making a push right now through the Free Them New York campaign. You can find information about it at freethemnewyork.com. You also got some postcards that I think Julie was passing out to you. For those of you who can sign it, put your zip code on it. We're mailing a bunch of postcards to him. October is our escalation month on this campaign. We are going to be harassing him. We've already been doing direct actions and other things to get the governor's attention. We have their attention now. We were able to work with Cynthia Nixon's campaign to get Cynthia Nixon to take on one of our demands as a campaign platform thing, So we've been doing a lot of the quote typical work you got to do, the outside inside game. I will say this. There are plenty of lawyers in New York that have signed up for this stupid thing that he has put together that's supposed to be this pro bono effort to help people in prisons fill out clemency forms and applications that are this friggin' high. He's got all these lawyers working on this, and these poor lawyers who keep putting in all this effort, sending it to them, and then it's like a black hole. There's no response, their people aren't getting out, nothing is happening. So I have lots of respect for lawyers. Jody will tell you I do. You know, some of my best friends are lawyers. But, like, you know, it's not gonna work like in the little one application at a time, would you please do this? You have to have an outside game, and you have to have outside people pushing so that your one application gets a hearing, and that actually like lubricates the, you know, the wheels of justice towards something better than what we currently have. So you can help us by calling him. We're going to have a phone blitz on October 23rd. We're going to be doing a workshop that I'm co-facilitating on the 16th of October at the new school. We get more and more people to know about this, to be asking questions about this, to be part of this campaign. We're going to free people from prison, and that's really important. And we got to use every lever, so this is one of them. So I'm going to end my remarks by just reading you a short clip of a poem by one of my favorite poets. His name is Jane Cortez. And her words really encapsulate why I think we have to continue to fight for justice everywhere, and really how we can. And the poem's titled There It Is, and here's a part of it. And if we don't fight, and if we don't resist, and if we don't organize and unify and get the power to control our own lives, then we will wear the exaggerated look of captivity, the stylized look of submission, the bizarre look of suicide, the dehumanized look of fear, and the decomposed look of repression, forever and ever and ever. And there it is. I just think we have got to be fighting much harder. We are in the midst of a moment in our history of deep, deep peril. We've been here before. We've always had these moments. But right now we have an out-and-out white supremacist in power who is by no means going to listen to people with decorum ideas about how we're going to do shit. We are going to have to throw down in ways that I don't think people yet are comfortable doing. I certainly don't think white people are. And I'm going to say this because this is how we got here. White people are responsible for this mess we're in. And you're going to be the ones who are going to help get us out of it. And I think that and you're going to have to use all the means and all the tools and all your energies, and everybody's got to be involved. This is not a moment for bystanders. This is not a moment for you're in school, you're busy, your tests are happening. Good. Those things are always going to be in your life. You're always going to have shit to do. But you still have a responsibility to be part of a polity that is not going to be one that crumbles to the ground, having killed and harmed millions of people in its wake. Your job is to be part of the fight. Find your place, find your lane, keep your hope going, practice it every day. Don't give in to despair, which is a tool of your enemies. Fight, fight, fight. Thank you so much. Minutes of questions, or 15 minutes. I think we go till 7:30. Is that right? All right, I did it. I was not going to go over. I'm a stickler for time. People who know me know this. Like, I like to start on time, end on time, everything on time. So if you have questions, comments, thoughts, please feel free to ask them. I might not have answers, and I'll just be like, I don't know. Somebody else in the room might have the answers.
Talk to the mic.
Oh God, people hate that.
No.
Okay, people love it. Okay, y'all, come up to the mic and ask your questions. I'm told you love that. Come over. You're all just sitting there completely obliterated by my brilliance. I know. It's hard.
So, thank you so much for this talk. So you mentioned the Free the New York, Free the NY. So is that like the main way we can get involved with your New York mobilization?
Oh yes, absolutely. Okay. The Free Them New York campaign is part of our general campaign. We have Survived and Punished New York. Julie's here from Survived and Punished New York. We started back in December. Here we have a Survived and Punished national kind of mobilization formation. We started that in 2015. We have affiliates, so we have one in Chicago, one here now, and in California. And the New York affiliate, we meet once a month. We actually meet here believe it or not, at NYU. I know NYU doesn't know that. But we do meet here. We do meet here because a couple of your students are part of Survivors Unpunished New York, and they get a space, right? They do the thing that you're supposed to do when you have access to resources. They free the land and allow people from the community to come in and use the space. So that's what happens. That's a good part of your university. They should be happy. But security might be mad now, but whatever. But we do meet here on Sundays once a month, and we just kind of have been doing a lot of things. So one thing has been the mass commutations campaign. That's that. We're doing a push against the DA in preparation for the DA election in 2019 in Queens, to try to run a candidate against the current sitting person and get them to actually focus on criminalized survival. So we have a working group that's the DA working group. We have a working group that's working on commissary, creating a fund for people who are long-term incarcerated people in Taconic and Bedford, particularly to start with, to create a commissary fund for people who are life without parole population, because they've been there for so long, they don't have their families who can come and visit them, and they don't have money. And then we have what's our fourth group? Newsletter, that's right. So we're working, the group of people are working on creating a newsletter in the tradition of a newsletter that used to be called No More Cages, and Through the Looking Glass. These were kind of two newsletters that were created by radical feminists, who, most of them socialists, who created these newsletters in the 1970s and 80s, and they would send them inside to survivors who were on the inside, and it would be a two-way conversation between the inside and outside. And so we're revamping that idea for the current moment. So that's what people are doing, and you're welcome to come to any of our meetings if you're interested. You can leave your email, and I'll let you know when the next meeting is, and you're welcome to come and join.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something real quick about the postcards. You can fill it out here, we have some pens, or you can take it home, you can leave it here, we'll mail it, you can mail it on your own. Just remember, put a very brief love note to Cuomo, I'll leave that to your discretion, and then just leave your name and your zip code. You don't have to give your full address, obviously it has to be New York State. And then you can put a 2 over here.
Okay.
We'll put stamps on them, and you can leave them here.
Okay.
And then if you're, you probably, most of you follow Miriam on Twitter, but if.
Don't all follow me.
Okay,
I hate that.
No, I wasn't
Yeah.
suggesting, I was just saying.
I really hate people who follow me on Twitter for 2 reasons. I'll tell you after.
Okay. We also use the other hashtag, which is why Cuomo hates us. We use Cuomo MIA, as in missing in action.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find our events either under Cuomo MIA, Survived Unpunished,
Free Them New York.
and Free Them New York. Also, as Miriam mentioned, on the 16th, we're gonna have that event that's in conjunction with Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is October. And so those are a whole bunch of different ways to get involved in the meantime.
Thanks, Julie. All right. Well, who are other people who have comments or questions that you want to share? Please. You don't even have to. You don't have to
No,
get
go
it.
to the mic because it's on.
Oh, they're taping?
For the posterity.
Awesome. Great.
Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the strategy behind a mass clemency campaign as compared to the individual survivor defense campaigns, and then the different organizing infrastructure to do something like that. Anything about that would be interesting.
Thank you for asking. So the problem with it, the good part about having individual defense campaigns is if those individual defense campaigns are explicitly tied to a broader, like making a broader case. But often individual defense campaigns are run by family members, people who are desperately concerned about their loved ones, and are not about making a political statement in a broader kind of way that talks about, like, why are these people locked up in the first place? What do we need to change structurally in order to have less people, locked up in this kind of way? That's not like the aim. The aim is raising money for their person, making sure their people get out, right? Like, and that becomes the thing. So that kind of a strategy doesn't necessarily lead to what it is that we want, which is to make this an issue that people understand is about systems and structures, and that in order to actually end these things, we're going to have to change systems and structures. That it isn't just about an individual person or an individual case. It also makes it much easier. Often when you're doing individual cases, it's easy to fall into the exceptionalist trap and model, which is like this particular person deserves to be free because they're worthy of freedom and they deserve freedom. But all these other MFers, they just can stay behind bars forever. And we are not, that's not our motto or what we're trying to do. We're trying to we're trying to create a decarceral strategy that's broad-based, that makes people understand the connections. We use domestic violence and sexual violence because it is such an incredible railway pipeline to the criminalization of so many people who are particularly vulnerable. And we're making it case that if we don't uproot those things, we're not going to be able to deal with the numbers of people who are locked up and criminalized, right? So we're trying to get attention on a thing that people don't focus on that much. If you understand the histories of kind of mobilizations around prisoners in the US, it has been particularly male, very much about Black men, and other populations have not gotten the same level of attention. And it's hard to say that because prisoners don't get attention in general. So we're fighting an economy that's an economy of scarcity already. But it's really important to talk about gender nonconforming peoples. It's really important to talk about women. It's really important because I don't think you can understand what's happening around criminalization if those populations are left out. So we're using these defense campaigns as a way to insert that language around the gendered nature of the criminalization that's occurring, right? And gendered meaning like men have a gender too, right? Like, you know, and that these things have, they play themselves out in particular ways, but you know, people have differentiated experiences, but are all exposed to premature death. So that's what we're trying to talk about, is what are the differentiated experiences, you know, that are leading to premature death, which is what criminalization really is, right? Those things are the things that we think about. So we're trying to push in California. Our California chapter is doing a lot of work right now on basically life without parole, trying to get Governor Brown, before he leaves, to commute a bunch of sentences for the life without parole population, which will not even have a chance to go before parole board. So like, can he at least commute people to life with parole so they have a chance to go? Some of these people have been in for 30, 40 years now. And so that our affiliate over there is doing a lot of work. Our affiliate in California is also older than we are and is connected to the California Coalition for Women Prisoners. CCWP has been working for 25 years inside the prisons in California. So we have a lot of Survived and Punished inside members in California. We're working on getting an inside membership in New York as well for Survived and Punished. So we have members of our teams who are part of our organization who have been visiting survivors, because we've been talking to them to see if they want to be part of the Free Them New York campaign. We've been writing to them and then visiting them. And Julie actually just finished doing last week an orientation for our new members so they can go and visit the prisons as well and have conversations with people on the inside, mostly at Bedford. And I think this is important too, which is like, we were talking about this at our last meeting about like, it's really important to go inside prisons. Like, I think there are people, which is always shocking to me, but true, there are people in this country who've never seen the inside of a prison and never been in there. I don't think have anybody who's been inside, which is weird because there's millions of people who've churned through the jails and prisons in our country. But there are those folks, and so it's important to go there because you need to see what it means, what total control looks like, and what unfreedom looks like in order to be able to fight like hell on the outside for the people who need our support. Does that answer your questions? Okay. Good. Any other people have comments, questions? Yes, please, come on down.
I was not stricken, but I found it interesting you're talking about Joanne Little defense campaign, and I need to do my own homework, but I was wondering, since you identified that singularly as either the last or the only mass mobilization to free someone, was there any...
For Black women.
There we go.
Targeted by state violence.
With some of the campaigns of the past 10 years, was there something culturally that changed, or was that just, did it not ever get to the maybe intersectional place or like the many different groups calling for someone's freedom?
That's really a great question. I don't know. I think that Joanne Little's case was unique because of the moment that it happened. It happened in 75. She was in 74, and then her trial was in 75. This is the moment this is the nadir of the Black freedom movement of the modern era. So like the Panthers, all these folks are getting killed, are in prison, all this stuff is going on there. The anti-war movement is winding down, right? Like, because basically, you know, people are seeing the end of Vietnam. There's like, there's kind of like this fomenting of all this stuff that was going, and those things intersected in her case. People saw different levels of it. It was the prison stuff, it was the sexual violence stuff, it was the black nationalists, it was like everybody could converge on this particular case. So we haven't had that kind of a case in this modern era. You know, I don't see a case that could galvanize BLM along with HRC, along with, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what is the actual campaign that brings all those groups to the table with fierceness. And also, we don't have lesbian radical feminists anymore. Like, we have a few old timers, you know, like, who are like some of my touchstones and the people who taught me. But for this current moment, I don't think there are that many. And really, honestly, radical lesbians, like feminist socialists, are the ones who saved a lot of that stuff. They were the ones who did the anti-prison work of the 1960s and 70s. And they just aren't there in numbers anymore. Yeah. Other people, thoughts, comments? Oh, sure.
I don't usually ask questions, but I would certainly agree with you that organizing here in New York is not always very productive. I'm going to say that, and people do tend to tear each other down. I have seen that, so I'll just say it. So my question is, given the work that we do in Survived and Punished, and I'm thinking of two other major things that are going on in the city right now. One is the mass bailout, which if people have heard about it? Okay. There's the mass bailout, and then there's the rather contentious, if you will, mayor's plan to build new jails and the response to that. Okay, so I see people nodding. So my question is, without trying to make it brief, my question is, would this potentially be a moment to build a better way to organize together in New York from an abolitionist perspective? And it's a very broad question.
No.
You
I
know.
don't think people are really abolitionists in New York. I think people are situational abolitionists, which I understand. Like, you know, they're abolitionists, but not for these people. And that's not what abolition was. That's not the, you know, Faye Knox version of abolition. That's not Mills Christie's version of that. That's like some weird version of abolition for the 21st century of this moment. And I just don't know. I don't know if it's possible to sustain because of the NGOization of organizing in New York. Like, think about the groups that are at the head of those things you just mentioned. These are groups that are nonprofits whose money depends desperately on state funds and all sorts of other, like, these aren't going to be groups that are going to be explicitly abolitionists so their funders can take their money. Then they're not interested in that. Which is why I think we don't take it and get any money on purpose. Like, we're going to raise our money from people. But not everybody can do that. Or not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to base build. People want to, and I understand, people want jobs as organizers. I never ever thought I would get paid for organizing. I don't. So it never even occurred to me that it was a possibility when I started, because nobody I knew got paid to organize. People had jobs and organized. That's always been, like, you had your job and then you had your work. So that's always the way that I've always thought about this stuff. And I know I'm old, so it's very different now. You know, people are just pay me for telling you two things, you know? How are you gonna pay me? I just told you something that Claudia Jones talked about in 1948, but whatever, you know what I mean? It was my invention. I'm like, honey, no, it was not your invention. 400 people already figured that out, but whatever. So, yeah. But we're just at a different time. And I really don't know. I don't think people in New York want a different way. I get it. Anybody else? Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just talk into the mic.
Sure.
So thank you so much for being here. I wanted to just comment on the essay with which you began, which it remarked on trauma, sexual trauma that was exacted on some of these women by men in their lives before they entered the prison system. I really appreciated the list that you had, listing debt and poverty as a form of violence. I appreciate having a holistic perspective on these women and their lives prior to entering incarceration. How do we in our own Black and brown communities and white communities need to do this too, think about alleviating the behavior that leads to trauma, that leads to victimization? How do we think about these concepts at a broader level at home and in our own communities and in our society? How do you think about trauma and our trauma society?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, and it's a huge one. I'm not somebody who knows a lot about the kind of physiology of trauma or I'm not a social worker. I don't, but I understand the concept of generational trauma as a materialist proposition. It's hard, right? Because I get part of the way that the state operates, because the state is the central organizer of all gender violence. Yeah, and our communities are mirrors of that and reflect that. And it's a dialectical kind of experience. And the state then blames us for interpersonal violence within our communities and says, we have to do these things because you're all so violent. When in fact the state is the mass violence purveyor, as King rightly said before they killed him. The biggest purveyor of violence is our state. So I don't know how we talk about those things separately. They are part of the same thing. That even if we found ways to be socially peaceful with each other and not traumatize each other, the state would still be a purveyor of trauma against us. So we gotta be working on simultaneous ways of handling this. One of the ways that I try to address interpersonal violence in my own communities is through restorative and transformative justice. I hate talking about this in public though. Because I don't think people really want restorative, transformative justice. I don't really think that's what people want for the most part. I think people are pretty happy with punishment and revenge. It's actually a Judeo-Christian way of thinking about how people learn. People do it to their children from the time their kids are young, to do discipline, it's this weird, and it's very white, you know what I mean? In not in the sense of white people, but whiteness. It's this thing that pervades within the US. But I try in my own communities to practice that work. And that's the best way I know how to intervene around issuing and addressing trauma within the communities I'm a part of. Now, I don't think, people always want to think about scale in this country, because everything that's done has to be put to scale, whatever that means. And I don't know how you do that to scale generally with people who really don't want, Tony K. Bavara's in The Salt Eater says at one point, one of the characters says, but honey, do you really want to be healed? I think about that all the time when I hear people talk about shit, and I was you don't really want healing. You want something else? And can we dissociate those things? And the something else you want is to seemingly to punish people till they die. And I'm not sure how we overcome that, because that's also trauma-inducing for the person who caused harm, and cycles itself into ongoing, perpetual violence. I don't know what to say about it. We're in a really tough moment right now, right? Today, we've got somebody who's in front of a group of both mostly white men, having to throw out their pain of having been harmed by somebody else who's also powerful. And I think a lot of people would like him to pay for what he did. And I'm pro consequences. Please don't get me wrong. I'm just not pro punishment. I don't think you should get a promotion for what, for sexually abused, but you actually should lose out on the job. That should be the base thing. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something I think about a lot, and I don't really know how to answer it in a broad way. I try to answer it in my communal way, and try to work with people who've caused harm in my own community particularly, to try to take accountability for that harm, to try to actually put us on a path towards the beginning of healing. So I run, I facilitate processes around community accountability and transformative justice for sexual harm and disability. So that's kind of my contribution to that piece of the work. Yeah. So that might, anybody? Oh, the last thing?
Yeah, no, I'm just gonna say, all 25 lectures have been magnificent.
Yes,
But
excellent.
and there's a lot of people who've been Scheinberg lecturers. I'm so happy you've moved to New York.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Yeah, definitely that. But I'm thinking particularly of Kathy Boudin. Have
Yes,
you worked
of
with
course
her?
I work with
yeah,
Kathy, yeah.
But there, a lot of people have sounded similar themes and raised similar problems. And nobody's had such a sharp critique of how bad we are in New York. I think we need to take that to heart and learn from you. And we will continue to learn from you. And this has just been magnificent. I'm sure you can stay up for a few minutes for the shy people who were afraid to get up and ask their questions. And then next door we have a reception, which you're all welcome to come to. But
Thank you.
Thank you.